Hello and welcome along to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Ian McKnight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today on the show, we're talking about buyer's remorse. And this comes from an anonymous listener of the show who says, "Hey team, I've got a question/podcast topic idea. I've stupidly put down what I thought was a low offer on a place that didn't particularly want, love those pushy agents, and my offer was accepted. As soon as I got the call saying I had it under offer, I thought, I didn't actually want this place, and now I'm trying to get out of it. It was a conditional offer, so fingers crossed it won't be too hard. But I just wanted to know if you could talk about buyer's remorse and any other situations like this you've heard of, or am I the only idiot out there? Cheers, and I'll be anonymous for this one." Sweet. So this is a great topic, by the way. And Andrew, just walk us through. There'll be people listening to the show who are thinking, how does somebody get themselves into this situation? So, just walk us through, why might this be, a somewhat normal thing to get yourself into?
Completely normal, and I've done this plenty of times. So it's normal, particularly in a hot market where you'd put multiple offers out there, because you go to some open homes, you look at 10 of them, you think, well, 5 of them I'd buy at the right price. I'll just make offers on all 5 of them. And of course, you obviously might not have the ability to buy all 5, but you're thinking, well, I'm going to make all of these because at each price, then I'd be happy at this, and I'll do my due diligence. Now, obvious due diligence you don't want to do if you're making an unconditional offer or you're going to auction, but it would be normal for an agent to try and encourage you to make an offer at the right price. So even if you say, hey, I'm not interested, they'll probably say things like, well, what price would you be interested at? Would you be interested at $1? Would you be interested at $2? And then they'll get an offer, because, of course, if they got 20 offers, it looks good to their vendor. And it also helps condition the vendor. So if a vendor's unrealistic at $1 million and then they get 5 offers at $900,000 and one at $920, well, it looks like, they've managed to squeeze an extra $20,000 out of someone, and now they're conditioned at $900,000 being about the market rate. And of course, they can also use different offers. If they say they've got 10 other offers coming in, or they put a multi-offer form in front of you, generally speaking, you will increase your price to more than what you were going to previously.
And just walk us through as well, Andrew, what sort of sales processes would this apply to? Because obviously this isn't going to happen with an auction.
Absolutely not auction, because then you're done deal. You've bought that property. Normally it would be something like a price by negotiation or a tender or a deadline sale, where you've got the potential for multiple offers to come in at one time.
And I think a lot of people are probably thinking, look, is this a bad thing that this person's putting down offers, or that somebody, an investor, might go out and put an offer on 5 or 10 places? And I think the answer is absolutely not, as long as you have the ability to get out of them. And what I mean by this is that you have the clauses in those contracts in order to be able to get out them. And in fact, one story that I want to tell you about is I remember speaking to my lecturer of economics at Waikato University, and he was saying that one of his good friends would sit there with the Sunday paper and just send out offers to anybody that said in their real estate ad, distressed vendor, motivated vendor, mortgagee sale, any of those kinds of situations, so that they would be able to potentially get a really, really good deal. So this is quite normal. But what we should do now, Andrew, is let's talk about the different clauses that somebody might use and how you might get out of them. And so why don't you just kick us off actually by talking about DD and right to cancel clauses?
Sure. So a due diligence clause is kind of the all-encompassing clause. It says something along the lines of the purchaser has the right to his due diligence investigations in any manner that they see fit for them, and that the sole benefit is for the purchaser. And this will have a time frame on it, normally 10 days or something like that, and then allows you to do whatever research you want. So you can look at the limb, you can talk about finance, you can check the title, everything you possibly want, and you can cancel for any reason whatsoever. It's so broad that you can say, oh, well, I don't like the colour of the door, even though you probably knew that to begin with. And you can cancel. For that reason, agents hate them. So what you'll find in a market that's hot particularly, but probably actually any market, is agents will try and get you to narrow down what it is you're looking for. So they'll say, well, what's your due diligence going to be? Builder's report and finance. Okay, well, let's put those clauses in there specifically. That way it's harder for you to wiggle out. You can't say, I don't like the colour of the door. if you've got a building report and finance clause. So right to cancel clause, that's something that we do at Opus Partners, but is probably something you're unlikely to see in a traditional real estate deal, where we say something along the lines of the purchase has the right to cancel without having to provide any reason to the developer or the vendor. And the reason we do that is we deal with people all day, every day, who might be experienced in buying one house but not multiple houses. So we want a real plain English clause in there. It is the same thing as a due diligence clause, but as I say, due diligence clauses are hard enough to get in a contract. Right to cancel, pretty much don't assume you'd be able to get that with a normal real estate agent.
The next one is finance clauses, and these used to basically be treated the same way as a due diligence clause. And what it would usually say is that the purchaser has the right to cancel if they can't get finance to the complete satisfaction of the purchaser, something along those lines. And what it used to be is that if you didn't like something, then you could just cancel on that, say, oh, I didn't like the interest rate or couldn't get the lending I wanted.
Yeah,
These days, it's much tougher. After, I believe, the Auckland District Law Society, they defined how this clause could be used. And I remember we talked, I think, at about episode 100 with Shelley Fennell about this. Now, what the vendor can do is ask you to provide evidence of that. And, if you were able to get finance, but just not at the interest rate you wanted, they may be able to have recourse to take this a bit further. Now, the one thing that's interesting is while the vendor might have the right to ask you to provide evidence and might have the right to make you settle if you were able to get some finance, just not just at the right interest rate, the vendor still has to go through that process. And so you may be able to get out of a contract on a finance clause, even though, technically you might have been able to get finance or whatever it happens to be, because at the end of the day, a contract's only good if somebody's going to enforce their side of it. And so you may be able to get out essentially using a finance clause, even though technically you've got to provide some evidence and the vendor could come back. So you don't want to bank on a finance clause, but if you get yourself in this sort of situation, you might be able to cancel on finance and then just hope that they don't ask you for evidence.
Not giving legal advice, just for the disclaimer there. Next, we're going to talk about solicitor's approval clause. Now, this isn't your lawyer being happy whether or not you can buy the house. This is normally whether or not they're happy with what's called form and content. So the contents of the sale and purchase agreement. This is a hard one to pull out on. Sometimes you can say something like, the LIM. They have to be happy with the LIM, which is the Land Information Memorandum. But again, there's got to be something really niggly in there to be able to use this as an exit clause. So this will just give the lawyer a chance to run over the contract, see if there's anything in there that's unusual. If your contract's done by a real estate agent, probably there isn't anything unusual in there, and they can only really negotiate a wording change or something like that. So don't use this as your cancellation clause or what you're going to hang your hat on, because I have enforced a sale based on a solicitor's approval clause in the past.
And then finally, I want to talk about building report. Now, the thing about a building report is it's not just good enough to say, oh, I wasn't happy with the building report, I'm going to cancel. Because what can happen is the vendor's got the right to go and remedy the property to fix the stuff that's in the building report. But look, again, not giving legal advice, but here we go, kids. Let's talk about good old negotiation. If there's something if you can get so many things in the building report that, look, it's basically it's impossible for the person to go and remedy, or such that it would be too much of a hassle, then there may be an argument to get out of it on the building report. But it just comes down to whether the person's got the money and the wherewithal to go and remedy for that. And look, practically speaking, if we're just talking pragmatically, when it comes down to it, if you're really going to go down the rabbit hole of given a really tough building report with everything possibly wrong in it, then I think there's a pretty good chance that the vendor would just let you out and say, look, I'll just take another offer. Do you think that's fair enough to say, Andrew?
Yes, yeah. Again, it's not something that I would recommend as being the one you're going to pull out on because of that right to remedy in a lot of cases. But if there was something major in the building report, then yeah, that's, for example, an asbestos roof or something like that. That's something that probably you'd have no difficulty cancelling on.
Yeah, and I think this comes down to as well, we don't know what anonymous listener of the show's contract specifically looks like. We don't know what clauses are in there, but these are some of the ways that you might be able to try and get out if you didn't have a DD. But actually, Andrew, you mentioned before that you've done this a number of times. Do you have any good stories for us that we can learn from your mistakes?
Yes, my only mistake is employing you to point them out. No. But one that jumps to mind specifically was I remember going to buy a house on Brockworth Place, and this was when I was really new. I mean, I was probably 20, and I made an offer on a property. I went to see it. I thought, this is great. Townhouse, Brockworth Place, close to the CBD. I should look up and see how much I made an offer for, because it's probably peanuts an hour.
$12,000.
Yeah. Yeah, and everything was in black and white. And then I remember sending out my valuer to go see, who was it? Keith Van Hollander, and he went to look at it and rang me. He's like, don't buy that house, it's a leaky home. This is before anyone knew what leaky homes were, and sure enough, I suppose we knew what they were, but it was very early days, and he said that's monolithic cladding and it'll cause you a world of pain. And so I only had a finance clause. Now these are back in the day where you could cancel a contract pretty easily on a finance clause, so I just cancelled on that basis. But nowadays, I would have been screwed, because going back and saying, I couldn't get finance, they'd probably ask me for a letter of offer or proof that I couldn't get the finance from the bank, which is very challenging to do.
Okay, well, let's take a different track now as well and talk about, let's say that anonymous listener of the show had to settle. So he's tried to get out on these clauses. What are his options if he had to settle? And I think the first thing is let's say the vendor doesn't let you out of the contract. As I said before, look, a contract is only really enforceable if somebody's got the bandwidth to try and make you to enforce it. And so if somebody's saying, look, I don't want to let you out on the finance clause, you could really play the hardball or be the not nice person. Just say, hey, look, I'm not going to settle on this because I don't want it. Now, look, the other person could take you to task for it. They could pursue you and try and force you to settle. That could happen. But also, you've got to be pragmatic about these things when it comes down to contracts. And if a hot market, perhaps they'll just take another offer. It's not legal advice, obviously. I'm not telling you to do this, but we're talking worst case scenario. Strategy number 2, of course, is playing hardball on these clauses. And we've kind of talked about what you could do here. But let's talk about a different scenario. Let's say that you're like, okay, I've got to buy this, but actually you got an okay price for it. You could do a quick cosmetic renovation, a clean up, and try and sell it straight away. And as long as you recovered your sale costs, maybe you'd be happy with that. You could do more of a flip style thing where it's a slightly bigger renovation. You do the 6 cash flow hacking principles. You try and increase the value and then say, hey, look, I'll pay bright line on it because I don't want it as a long-term rental. Or you could always think about some of the other things you could do. Well, maybe run the numbers on it again and see whether it could be an okay long-term rental. But I think what you'd probably first of all do, try and play hardball, try get out of that contract, see if they're actually going to enforce you to go ahead and settle on it, and then consider perhaps some things around doing a flip or moving that property on relatively quickly, paying bright line, but saying, hey, look, I'm just going to move on, and then learn your lesson from there.
Well, yeah, I guess if you've had an offer accepted, generally speaking, you haven't paid a deposit. And so the agents get paid out of the deposit. You can bet your bottom dollar if you say, I'm not paying my deposit, the agent's going to say, well, let's go back and remarket this thing and get another offer. Chances are you will get out of it just by doing that. And in fact, I've got a friend who's an agent who was saying the other day that they had someone that exactly that. They'd gone unconditional, they'd bought unconditionally at an auction, and then they said afterwards, actually, we've changed our mind. We're gonna cancel. We're not going to pay the deposit, and they said, okay, fine, we'll just go to the next offer.
Oh, that's really interesting. And the other thing within a contract is it says that if you don't pay your deposit if you don't pay your deposit, they've got to give you 3 days notice in order to cancel it. So you can try and force them to cancel, I guess is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also just remember, don't be afraid to make offers. Just kind of have something like a due diligence clause in your contracts if possible, because it's all encompassing, especially in a hot market like this, because you'll regret the deals you don't do later on, I promise you. And it's better just to kind of go out there and get as many offers as you possibly can accepted, and then do your due diligence after that.
Fantastic. Well, let's wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. It really does help us get the message out to more people. And hey, if you want to learn more about property, come along to our next webinar. It's happening on the 16th. That's next Tuesday of November at 7 p.m. And we're talking about debt to income ratios. And look, how do I keep on borrowing and growing a portfolio with the banks keeping on tightening their lending restrictions? That's what we're going to go over. So tap or swipe over the cover up. I'll drop a link in there. Or just go to opuspartners.co.nz and you'll be able to register there. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Ed McKnight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And we're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of the New Zealand property market. Until next time.